Okay, so as a lover of indie movies and analog horror, of course I was interested in Skinamarink and the Outwaters when I first heard about them and the polarizing reviews that quickly followed their releases. For Skinamarink, many people were raving about it, some saying it was the scariest movie they have ever seen.
Brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular.
And for those on the other side of the review spectrum, well,
This is... What? Boring.
This extremely low-budget and highly experimental film made serious waves during its film festival showings, and after being leaked online, quickly gained the internet's attention. It hit theaters in January and has since made over $2 million at the box office, which might not seem like a lot for a movie, but that is over 100 times its $15,000 budget. For reference, Multiverse of Madness, which was quite successful, had a budget of $200 million and almost hit $1 billion in ticket sales, that being 5 times its budget. Similarly, The Outwaters was made for about $15,000, made the rounds at several film festivals, had a limited theatrical release this February, and hit streaming soon after on February 17th. It has been praised for its unique cinematography and immersive horror experience. Both movies rely on a homemade feel to help them, well, hit home. They are both referential to the found footage style, which is a filming technique that presents a movie as uncovered film or video recordings and typically allows for a much lower budget because of this. It is especially popular within the horror genre. This style has had many iterations throughout the years, from the Blair Witch Project,
In spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault.
to Host. And it has become its own horror subgenre. Analog horror, a more recent subgenre of horror characterized by lo-fi graphics and VHS aesthetics, could be considered an offshoot of this technique. However, it doesn't rely on someone being behind the camera, separating it a bit into its own category. Skinamarink and the Outwaters perfectly exemplify their respective low-budget aesthetics, and even with being made for around the same amount of money, differ stylistically and narratively. Skinamarink dives into experimental analog horror, which has grown very popular on YouTube with series like The Mandela Catalog and Local 58. And in fact, a full-length analog horror movie with a theatrical release is rare, since most of these videos live solely online. In contrast, The Outwaters is much more traditional in its found footage approach. But what is it about these kinds of films that manage to go viral and capture our attention, even while being flanked on either side by million-dollar, big-budget, star-studded movies? What about how they are made helps them transcend their low budget and become sensations among the horror community? Join me as we dive a little deeper into Skinamarink, The Outwaters, and low-budget filmmaking like found footage and analog horror. Also, let me know, have you seen either of these indie movies, and did you enjoy them? Let me know in the comments below. There has been a lot of talk online about these two movies, and they have proven to be divisive, from some saying they were riveted and terrified the entire runtime, to others saying they were painfully bored. On review websites and apps like Letterboxd and Twitter, for Skinamarink it seems like you either like it or you don't. I don't rely on sites like Rotten Tomatoes to tell me whether a movie is good or not, but I'm using it here as a way to gauge how other people generally feel about the film. Currently, the movie holds a 71% critics and 44% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. The Outwaters seems to be faring slightly better, at least with the audience, with a 72 and 52 respectively. This means that about half the non-critic viewers enjoyed watching these films to some extent. Now, because I've covered analog horror in length a couple times already on this channel, I will be focusing a bit more on the critical reception and legacy of low-budget feature films in the found footage style to understand how the average viewer might feel about movies like The Outwaters and even Skinamarink. We have yet to see a pattern in mainstream audiences' reactions to analog horror, since the majority of analog horror is on YouTube and attracts a certain type of viewer. Funnily enough, many celebrated low-budget, found-footage horror films have had similar reception to Skinamarink and The Outwaters. The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity have split audience scores, but both are well known for being groundbreaking movies in filmmaking history. They helped show that independent filmmakers and other creatives deserve a chance to showcase their fresh point of view, stories, and skills. These movies also contributed to the found footage style of cinema becoming mainstream, so much so that big studios with much larger budgets started making their own to hop on the bandwagon, like Cloverfield. And of course, because money is king, it wouldn't be right unless we took those 2 great original films and made 8 sequels combined, pretty much just running these franchises right into the ground with each new installment. But anyway, if these first movies are so crucial to the evolution of modern horror, why the mixed reviews? Well, obviously, horror is innately subjective. Something that is scary to you might not be scary to me. If someone is not scared during a horror movie, they might rate that film lower than one that did scare them. But that is a factor for every horror movie, not just found footage. I think it's more the fact that found footage films are just so different from what we are used to seeing on the big screen, both visually and narratively, and that can certainly throw people off. The storytelling might be nonlinear, and even in some cases, like the film series VHS, unrelated, like an anthology of discovered videos. And for the visuals, well, handheld cameras can lead to the shaky cam syndrome, when the motion of the camera can be disorienting to the point of being distracting or even physically nauseating for some. Those might be the 2 main aspects of this subgenre of horror that can deter the audience. But these same cons can actually act as the movie's pros. The sometimes disjointed video clips mirror what we might actually film in real life. And that, along with the authentic cinematography, really ups the relatability we can experience while watching these movies. Sprinkle in mostly unknown actors, and we start to imagine these terrifying events happening in the real world, not just as some celebrity on a set. Both Skinamarink and the Outwaters benefit from having these same strengths, even while they add some otherworldly effects to make it their own. In total, all those aspects, mixed with specific fears and a distinctive directing style, can add up to be some of the scariest movies ever made. Now, I'll preface with the fact that I am not a film critic, just a lover of film. Personally, I found both movies entertaining and refreshingly unique. But they can definitely test your patience, as I felt both could have been cut a little shorter without compromising quality. Skinamarink can certainly be a slow burn and has a simplistic story, but its play on nostalgic media and use of childhood fears like being afraid of the dark and being away from your parents are effective in creating a constant sense of dread. I think I like Skinamarink a bit more than the Outwaters, but I am partial to the analog style. In the Outwaters, I liked getting attached to Robbie and the other 3 main characters in the first half, as that all felt very realistic and personal. The second half's much needed hard turn into horror was effectively terrifying, but the camera work was a bit too disorienting at times, even though I know that was the point, and I felt there was not enough time on what happens to Robbie's friends after the twist happens. I mean, of course I know what happens to them in the end, but I would like to see more of a balance between Robbie's experience and everyone else's. Still, in my horror-loving opinion, both movies were fun to watch in the moment. Their art and sound direction create exceptionally harrowing environments that set themselves apart from some of the more cookie-cutter horror movies that larger studios push out year after year. Because of the nature of analog horror and found footage, they easily lend themselves to a low budget, which in turn allows new, independent filmmakers to make movies that surprise us with their fresh ideas. I wanted to talk a little bit more about how these 2 movies use the found footage and analog experience to their advantage. The found footage style allows for a much lower budget since its essence comes from being filmed on a handheld camera or smartphone and brings a sense of realism that movies on steady, high-quality million-dollar cameras can't convey. Directors can then stylize their movie even more depending on what cameras they choose to emulate and how they shoot their scenes. Skinamarink goes one step further. Simply put, the movie is about 2 children who are stuck in their house as all the exits and their parents have disappeared. Visually, the film mirrors an analog video experience, and what separates it from the found footage genre is that even though it emulates home videos, that is just it. In context of Skinamarink's plot, these are just shots of the house. No one is filming. We do feel like we're watching found footage in many scenes though, since it's shown like an old VHS style video, grainy and quite low quality. It reminds us of the home videos of our childhood. The low resolution quality of the video also allows the filmmaker to use low lighting to underexpose the scenes and add plenty of darkness to hallways and corners of the rooms. The large swaths of darkness play with our fear of the unknown, as anything could be hiding, simulating a familiar childlike experience of being scared of the dark. It definitely helps to watch this movie with your full attention and all the lights turned off. If you really give yourself up to this movie, it can be very frightening at times. In fact, some of the shots remind me of Paranormal Activity, and I distinctly remember that being marketed as the scariest movie of its time. I mean, those commercials of the audience screaming were everywhere. Similar to Paranormal Activity, we have slow pans and shots of furniture and seemingly empty rooms. In both of these movies, our view is basically that of a fly on the wall, watching and actively scanning your eyes around the room to find anything that might look out of the ordinary. To some, these kinds of movies can feel more of like a mood as opposed to a fleshed out film, since the story is simplistic and there are plenty of scenes that don't necessarily add to the plot, only there to build the atmosphere. But the atmosphere is what's most important in these types of horror movies, with the house becoming a character in itself and the sense of dread building and building as we spend more time with it. Yes, there are lots of shots of corners that don't show anything, but certain scenes are very unnerving because of that build-up tension and sense of unknown, especially the very long shot of the mother sitting on the bed, facing away from the camera. We are filled with anticipation as we honestly have no idea what will happen next. The Outwaters falls a bit more in line with what we traditionally think of as the found footage style. We follow our protagonist Robbie and his video camera as he goes to the desert with his friends to shoot a music video. The film starts with text that explains these videos we are watching were found in the desert and the group has been missing ever since going out there. This film clearly prioritizes realism in order to connect with the audience. The first half impressed me with how natural everything felt, including our group of main characters. It really felt like I was watching homemade movies by real people, utilizing the found footage concept to the fullest. Since Robbie's an aspiring filmmaker, we get many well thought out shots and it makes sense within the plot. It's not like one of those movies where we are confused as to why the characters are so obsessed with filming everything. I mean, if a monster is chasing me, my first thought isn't to turn around to get his good side.
I read what happened to your last cameraman. The guy got gutted.
Anyway, the first half is softly lit and dreamy, mirroring the music video aesthetic they are going for. But of course, because of the cold open with the evident text, we know this trip takes a turn for the worse. Once they're in the desert, they are tormented by an evil being, and the filming directly reflects that. The filming is panicky, urgent, imitating their situation. The desert is completely dark at night, and the characters can barely see what is attacking them. We get that same experience through the camera work. It undoubtedly reminds us of movies like The Blair Witch Project. I mean, they are both about an unsuspecting group of young adults that are tormented by a supernatural entity, and we are watching these videos already with the knowledge that something bad happens to them. What I think works best for the Outwaters is the contrast between its two halves. The hard turn is effective and frightening, and the camera work echoes the plot, as we go from coordinated, well-lit, happy-go-lucky videos to disorienting, dark, and effectively shocking, showing us the unrelenting nightmare our protagonists are experiencing. Both the Outwaters and Skinamarink are successful in what they set out to do, creating a film that gets under your skin in one way or another. Skinamarink and the Outwaters made major ripples at film festivals and in the horror movie community. Yes, found footage is polarizing and a bit overdone, but the very nature of the style easily allows for waves of fresh content to continue coming out, deeper subgenres like analog horror to emerge, and lets new filmmakers flip everything we know about cinema on its head. In fact, it's only natural for the subgenre to evolve along with our society and technology, from documentary-type footage to handheld cameras to in-home security to smartphones, video calls, and laptop screens. It's also cool to see some new approaches to storytelling within the confines of these new advances in technology, even going so far as to revert back to the analog home movie aesthetic to produce effective analog horror. It makes me especially happy that it is new directors, writers, and actors that are behind these recent films that defy our expectations, just like the massive hits before them, like Paranormal Activity, The Blair Witch Project, and Host. Another nice thing for a new movie that is with an unknown cast and crew is that we can go into the theater not knowing what to expect, which can be rare for horror films as tropes and cliches run rampant.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula!
This subgenre can forego the typical conventions of traditional cinematic films, and the fresh talent seems to be all for exploration and experimentation as well. But honestly, what I love most about these kinds of movies is that they feel like passion projects. They aren't made by a big studio to make a quick buck. They are made by a few creatives using only the tools they have to create the vision they've been dying for others to see. It's refreshing to see new filmmakers putting themselves and their fresh ideas out there. Found footage and analog horror has had a resurgence, showing that there is very much a demand for this kind of media. I believe it is important that filmmaking is accessible to everyone, that everyone has a chance to have their art seen. It is crucial that we continue to make and support small films that defy our expectations of traditional filmmaking and the movie-going experience, even if they can be a little strange.